Good afternoon. I'm John Marshall with Potential Energy, and I am here to talk about the hush that has fallen over the climate movement. I'm going to give you a 20-minute talk, and then we're going to turn it over to our panel, led by Chase Kane, who is climate reporter and head meteorologist in NBC. But heard in the hallways over lunch and coffee, people everywhere are asking, should we say the word? Is it not relevant in people's lives? Should we just go through the side door, talk about clean energy, find another way to approach it? How do we tackle this? Is it just too risky? As LA burns, Florida floods, insurers pull out of California, the EPA considers not doing its one job to actually protect the Environment Protection Agency. There's a debate going on in our community about should we even say the word. The IRA was our country's most significant climate achievement, and yet climate change, was barely talked about upon its dismantling. So one thing is clear to me, that our children's generation and our grandchildren's generation will indeed judge how we approach this moment, but I'm not here to give you a moral argument. I want to actually just do one thing, which is the thing that Potential Energy is designed for. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm just going to share some data. You can draw your own conclusion whether or not you should say the word. Quickly about us, we are a 5-year-old nonprofit marketing firm formed by a bunch of people who used to work with big companies to help them with their brands, and the American Expresses and the Walmarts and so forth. And one day my 17-year-old said, "Dad, you useless fool, you're selling soap and shampoo, do something worthwhile." And so upon that moment, he locked me in the house, and Potential Energy was birthed. So we are basically dedicated to using the analytical techniques of the for-profit sector to try and sell this one product, which is clean energy and climate change. And we're driven solely by data. I don't bring any POV into this other than what the data says, and so that's where I'm going to lead you. Over the last 5 years, we have obsessed over what the data says. We have surfed and measured 4 billion ads. We have sat through about 3,500 hours of focus groups, which is an enduring event, I will tell you. We have done almost 1,200 individual message tests. Yes, we do polls as well, but what we're trying to do is use the corporate techniques of actually let's run a campaign and let's measure what happens in the real world and try and get actual data to bear on this. I want to talk a little bit about data for a second. The number 15. 15 out of 18 in terms of a citizen priority. Do you know what I'm talking about right now? I'm talking about immigration in the year 2012. Okay? 2 election cycles later, number 1. I just want you to contemplate the idea of looking at dynamic data rather than static data, then viewing polls as things to shoot at or viewing polls as things to move. So stop for a moment, release yourself from the 1,000-person static push poll, and ask yourself, if we message effectively, what might we be able to accomplish? That's the data that I have to share with you. So let's look at what's changed. Let's look at what the data actually says. What has changed over the past year, or the past few years? Politics seems to have changed. These are headlines. It isn't just the US, the whole world is soured on climate politics. Labor's net zero delusions become a gift for Nigel Farage, et cetera, Canada, other places. There is this moment where political leaders are saying, should we actually address the issue? Business has changed. This is Bloomberg's number of mentions of the word climate on earnings calls over the course of the last 3 years, plummeted by 70% from 1,100 to 300. Let's look at the citizens. 2023 in the US, the number of people who are concerned about climate change. 2024, it dropped by a point. December 2024, 64%. Okay, what happened since then? Back up to 65. While we are sweating and worrying and anguishing and languishing over whether or not we should say the word, the regular people out there do not know what we're talking about right now. They are living their lives, they are concerned about this issue, and they are not part of this dialogue that we happen to be having. What does this dialogue do, however? What has changed is the percentage of citizens hearing about climate change in the media once a week has plummeted in the last 4 years. This is data from the Yale Center for Climate Change Communications. In September 2021, 35% of humans said, I hear about the issue once a week in the media, and now it is half that. So our behavior, our leadership, our choices about whether or not we say the word do have implications in the real world. They have implications as to what real people are hearing. That has its own implications, because we could either be in a virtuous cycle where we, on the right-hand side, where we talk about the issue, we have courage, we have wins, we celebrate those wins, we increase the support, or we're on the left side where we don't talk about the issue, it gets lower media mentions, it gets lower salience, and we have less courage to actually attack the issue. So we are at a critical fulcrum for the climate movement, and we are asking ourselves this question, should we say the word? Now, let me go to a little bit of a deeper bunch of data here. Are climate policies popular? Here are 17 climate policies that we've tested over the years. We've tested these in 23 different countries. This is a big sample size. This is over the course of many years. This is in the US. The blue is the percentage of citizens who support these policies. The gray are the percentage of citizens who oppose these policies. On average, this suite of policies has a 5-to-1 support per opposition ratio. Some things are harder. Phasing out fossil fuels is harder. Banning your gas stoves is harder. Yes, we know those are hard, but on average, the suite of policies has a 5-to-1 popular. And for Republicans, for conservative Republicans, they are still more popular than not popular. This is what the data says. Great. Can we do a victory lap? Well, not quite. If you take a top two box, so strong support or support for a suite of policies that we need to deploy clean energy, we need electric transportation, we need to decarbonize industry, we need to decarbonize buildings, and we need eventual limitations on fossil fuel. You're sitting at about 50, let's say 48 to 50% support, okay? Great. Can we bank on that? Well, it's higher than the opposition. I just showed you that it's higher than the opposition. What happens when the opposition shows up? Does the opposition show up? I think the opposition does show up. What happens when they show up? It goes down by 15 to 20 points. So the reality that we're actually facing, because there are forces that do not want these things to happen, is that we are facing 39, 37, 38, 30, and 17 support. And there are there are effective narratives that do this. On the right-hand side, transitioning away from fossil fuels is impractical and it will cost you too much. In the middle, they're banning your stuff, okay? EVs, these cars pollute more than gas cars. They don't happen to be true, but they happen to be effective. If we choose our best narratives, by pushing this button, we win, we soundly win. We win by 3-to-1, but we have to show up in order to do that, even on fossil limitations, if we frame it in the right way. We actually have a winning argument. This is a winning argument, but it only works if we show up on the issue, and we sure aren't showing up if we say we shouldn't say the word. Okay. Let me give you something that's going to start to surprise you. After 5 years of actual tests in the market, and this is from sampling 420,000 people, so this is not a small poll, how much growth do we create when we talk to people about climate change? Now, Democrats are pretty high, so there's only so much headroom there, but we can grow the size, this is the size of the segment, so we can grow the size of the segment, this is from 24 different campaigns, by 13 percentage points. Let's talk to independents. Oh, very interesting. They grew by 23 percentage points. Now, it's off to a lower base, so the thing is higher, but it's still 6, 8, 9 points lift. Let's move to Republicans. What happened when we exposed them to a message? Again, dynamic context, not static context. 30%. Oh, let's make it a little harder. Let's go create a segment, which we did, of people who believe disinformation. Let's ask a series of questions. Do you think George Soros is controlling the weather? Do you think people in Springfield, Ohio are actually eating their pets? That happens to be 15% of the US population. I'm now going to expose you to a message that says climate change is potentially harming you and your family. I grow the size of that segment by 39 percentage points, okay? There is a myth. There's a static polarization. There's a myth of dynamic polarization, because what is happening is people are not getting the message. They're not opposed to it. There's not two rams butting heads. It's a lack of information and a lack of communication that's causing this issue. We can grow pet-eating believers by 39% by exposing them to messages that an overheating planet is not good for them and their community. Now, we can't do it by doing it in a simple way. We've got to think deeply. We've got to understand who we are. We've got to meet them where they are. But this is what the fact is, okay? So hush this, all right? Then this is for 400,000 people, this particular data. Okay, so where do we go from here? There's another myth. Oops, we went too far is where we went. The other myth is we shouldn't go through the front door or we should go through the side door. Let's not talk about the problem. Oh, it's such a bummer. It's so negative. So much anxiety, so much worry. Let's just talk about the solution. Okay, so we have done 1,200 message tests. This will be peer reviewed because we're working with the Yale Center for Climate Change Communications and dumped all this data into a data set. And we categorized all of these message tests into two kinds of messages. Messages where we say the word climate and messages where we just talk about clean energy, okay? And the outcome variables are multiple. Do these messages increase support for clean energy? Do they increase support for action on climate? Do they increase your worry about climate? And do they make you think that big polluters should pay? In every case, the climate change message was a bigger why than the clean energy message to create support for clean energy, okay? Yes, we need the clean energy message. We need the jobs message. We need the cost message. We need all these kinds of things. But we have been given, by dint of a massive amount of pollution, the biggest why humanity has ever had, which is we are destroying the planet that we are living on, and we cannot debate whether or not we use that why. We have massive statistical evidence that that why is important, and it keeps coming up to the top. Okay, but it's not necessarily just doing it, it's how you do it. And I think this is where it gets important. And there are better ways to do it, and there are worse ways to do it. I think in the past, we can see from the data that there are things that are narrow that go after 30% of the population, and then the things that are broad that go after 70% of the population. I will note a Gallup survey that the number of Americans who identify as an environmentalist over 3 decades went from 71% to 41%. I have no purpose in dissing the environmental movement as part of this, but I think we need to broaden what it means to think about environmental issues because it has become narrower and narrower as time has gone on. What we have seen from our data is what we need now is a very big shift from what I would call morality to materiality. So the data, out of all the messages we tested, the data says that those that talk about today's impacts, today's costs, today's fears, that avoid some of the social cause language, the values-based language, the ban language, the you should language, the you must language, the mandate language, get into language of abundance and cost and reality, work very well. They discuss the real life consequences of scary storms, skyrocketing insurance rates, and they're the message that are going to land today. So to do this, to be effective, we need to make a move. We need to talk about climate. We need to talk about climate in a way that really, really impacts how Americans will see the issue. Now, I'm going to share an ad that we ran at the Super Bowl. Now, it wasn't a national ad. It was run in LA during the wildfires. But we got an interesting learning. We had a very generous donor who had the inventory, and we thought, let's go do this. And so we went through our inventory of great ads, things we were really proud of, and said, let's run this, and let's measure it, and let's learn. So we go into this phenomenon with this fear of this polarizing issue where, oh my goodness, we're going to get so much backlash and people are going to hate us, and what are we going to do about it, and it's too risky, and we might want to avoid it, or we might want to think differently. And so you might have seen the ad. I'll share it with you, and then I'll tell you how it did. Oh, where is it?
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. The day she gets her first pet, there are thousands of newly extinct species she'll never meet. The night she forgets to call, the night of her first heartbreak, her future home floods for the first of many times. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
Leaders are shying away from climate change because they fear it's not an everyday issue that voters will connect with. But the only reason it's not an everyday issue is we're not talking about it every day. And the only reason it's not connecting is because we're not necessarily working hard enough to make it connect. Rather than ducking the issue, we need to really embrace it, and we need a massive shift in the narrative. What was the impact of this after our great fears of massive polarization and social media backlash and people calling out my family for being evil? 82% positive sentiment, 14-to-1 ratio positive to negative, okay? Have you all seen that? What's the other social issue campaign that ran during the Super Bowl. It was, he gets us, the Christianity, more negative than positive, okay? So 82% positive sentiment. And the main thing we got in the social media feeds was, this makes me feel less alone, okay? So we can look at number 15 in the polls and we can sit around and say, oh, we need to find another way to do it. Or we can say, our job is to make that 15 number one. And we're not at 15 right now, by the way. Our job is to do that. And that's what leadership and courage are. And so I'm just going to assert that there has never been a better time to say the word. Walk out of this building with pride in what you do, and talk about the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced without going through the side door. So those are my remarks, and I will now invite Chase on stage so we can do the panel. I've never been 4 minutes early in my life. I can take questions. I actually can take questions, but maybe I shouldn't. All right, welcome.
Round of applause for John Marshall, the work that Central Energy Coalition is doing.
Thank you. Hey, Maria.
Wonderful panel.
Okay, we can turn me off.
Here, I will sit here. You can sit here. I will introduce them as they walk on, just so we can get right in. We have Mindy Luber, or actually Maria Mendelute. Did I say that correctly? Close.
Yeah,
for someone from Atlanta, Georgia. Mindy Luber, and then Catherine McKenna. Maria is the CEO of the We Mean Business Coalition. She has also held senior positions in the Economic Bureau under Spain's Prime Minister. An honor for you to be here with us. Mindy Luber is the CEO and president of the sustainability nonprofit Ceres. She's also a former regional administrator of the EPA. And last but certainly not least, Catherine McKenna, Canada's former Minister of Climate Change and Minister of Infrastructure, a distinguished fellow at Columbia. She launched Women Leading on Climate, and currently the CEO of Climate and Nature Solutions. So let's please welcome these three wonderful, hardworking, passionate women we have with us today. And I will say, apologies to the gentlemen in the room, but I think if women were leading the world, we probably would have solved climate change years ago.
We would have.
Yeah.
True.
So John just gave a presentation which I believe was encouraging to all of you, that the data, that the numbers, that the people are on the side of climate action, of wanting to protect our planet. But you also saw the numbers that we're talking about it less collectively. And as a member of the media, it's something that sometimes I see, you know, across media of all kinds. We are talking about it a little less, it seems. So this idea of climate hushing, climate silence, what do you think is the line there between, I'm using different words to talk about climate change, but I'm not saying climate change, versus just not talking about it at all? And any good examples you have?
Maybe you can go there, because
Please.
being Spanish, for me, this greenwashing is something I don't get. So maybe we move on.
And that's good context. Maybe
Yes.
this is a more North American or English-speaking phenomena. Catherine, if you want to start us.
Well, I'll give an example. I mean, I have like a million examples, but I'll give you one. So this summer, probably everyone knows that probably wildfires are still burning Canada, burning all across the country. I was excited. We were hosting the G7. I thought, okay, well, I guess we're going to talk about climate change because it's as much as an economic issue as anything else. And you know, businesses have highlighted it as the number one, or maybe now democracy is the number one issue, but it's at least one or two. So we get the text of the communique, and the text of the communique did talk about wildfires, but it didn't talk about climate change. It just was like, wildfires are this problem that has dropped from space. And then it said, and we got to deal with arson. And I was like, oh, that is the number one climate denial thing on my Twitter probably right now. So it's this idea that we don't even talk about the thing. And by the way, people in Canada, and I have Jane on my team here who can vouch for this. She's from Manitoba, from Winnipeg. All summer, there was like massive smoke. Kids couldn't go outside, like the perfect opportunity to actually talk about something that is in people's faces that people are really worried about, and it's not gonna get better. And so this whole hushing thing, I know we'll get into it, and I love John Marshall's presentation, because it's garbage. Like, people are worried about the thing, but you gotta talk about the thing, and that is leadership, and that is what's lacking, because leaders don't seem to want to talk about it, so then people are like, well, I don't know, maybe it is arson or something.
And you can give us the United States perspective,
Yep.
because there is a perception that there are more climate deniers than there probably actually are.
Well, I don't know if I think there are more climate deniers. I think some of the data that John showed is well, there may be more climate deniers than last year. The bottom line is the numbers are real. People support acting on climate. Now, we may use different words for different constituencies. I spend all my time working with business and investors to bring them into the debate, have them analyze climate risk and act on it. as a logical step for any rational business. There's a reason 90% of CFOs say, we are staying the course. We're going to spend more on climate and sustainability next year than we did last year. It is real, it is happening, and making believe it's not happening, I think, fools nobody. We need to be smart about how we're communicating. Who's your audience, what words we use. Let's not talk about GHG emissions, which barely I understand. I've been in this space for 40 years. Well, I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer. Tell me what it means, I don't. But we ought to talk about the kind of loss, the billions of dollars of loss, or the kids' future, or that kids can't go to camp because it's too hot. The list goes on and on. We need to be speaking to the people in their language in a way that works. So it is not about not talking about climate, in my judgment. It's about having a narrative, but it will vary depending on audiences, and using it and using it well. But let me show you an example of where we are seeing hushing and what's driving that and what it means. We know what's driving it, of fear, of retaliation. The first time the president came into office and he pulled out of Paris, in 3 days, we had 105 CEOs of the largest companies and investors who agreed not only to sign something, but to put their name in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. And it wasn't that hard to get. This time, new time around, we couldn't get 5 people. Now, I suspect that all those people who signed the first time are still acting on climate with a little bit less energy. That's perhaps the case. They still know it's real, they still know we have to act, they still know they have to act, but they just didn't want to talk about it. They believe somebody is out there to strike them down. The common knowledge is, I don't want a target on my back. That's the problem. It is fear that somebody is going to retaliate against them, and that may be the case for those living here and seeing what we've seen. I don't think they're backing out of their climate goals. It is not what we're seeing. I do think without public acknowledgement on a regular basis, they may be dealing with it a little bit less aggressively internally, because being transparent, having accountability helps keep players moving forward. But I don't think any of those companies or anyone else believes climate change has gone away, or they're just afraid to talk about it because we're in a climate right now of retaliation. They know it's the case, and I think for all of us, running away from it is just not the answer. The problem is real. We need to talk to people in the language they talk. I talk about materiality and not morality. I talk about financial risk and what that means. I talk about what it's going to mean to insurance companies or to people trying to get insurance. The audience matters, the message matters, but there is no world where I think running away from this and supporting climate hushing makes any sense. It doesn't reflect the reality of the world people are living or what we're seeing in the polls. People want to act on climate. They may not know how, and they certainly don't want to do it publicly right now, but that shouldn't stop us.
Maria, if you would, give us the view from Spain, from also the international business community, because that's a large part of your work. How is this action being perceived? Or the lack of action, the lack of conversation?
Well, in my country, in Spain, there were floods, there have been wildfires. Everybody knows that this is due to climate change. I think the problem that people have, and they want to do something about it, is that they don't know what to do sometimes. I think from a business perspective, it's very clear on the conversations I'm having are very down to earth. How can we solve these problems? What can we do? It is true that there's been some green hushing from companies. I think there's 2 aspects. There's one, the political situation here in the US for American companies. Also the fact that, that sometimes companies that have been talking about the progress that have been made, they might have been accused of greenwashing. And so they say, okay, you know, we are doing our best and we are being scrutinized. Other people are not doing much, are having a free ride, right? So I think all that matters, but I have to say that in my conversations with business, you know, the commitment to find solutions is there. I think the low-hanging fruits have sometimes, you know, many times already been taken. And I think now we have the hard and difficult conversations that involve collaboration between different sectors. And it is just fascinating what I hear. But it's true that I hear it at working group level and less at CEO level.
how might you encourage a business leader who is a little bit more afraid? Maybe they're based in the United States, a lot of their business is in the United States, and they're nervous about this, as they mentioned, that they don't want to have a target on their back. How would you encourage them?
Well, I think there's so much to be done that what I would encourage is to keep going, because it is not only about talking, it's a lot about doing as well. And I also encourage companies to focus on where we can have impact in the next few years, and to also to have the vision on what is coming afterwards. So for example, electrification, electrifying energy uses is a smart thing to do. It makes sense, that's what the market is driving. Well, let's go full on that, because we know that this will be fundamental for the changes to come, for example.
And please.
Yeah, so we need to do a few things. I want to make sure I come back and say something about Jimmy Kimmel, because it relates to my answer. One is we need to speak the language of business or investments. We need to be talking about material financial risk, which will impact their bottom line today, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. People used to say, this is only long term. That is not the case anymore. This is now, and companies can both have to deal with the risk and consider opportunities. We also need to build the surround sound. Companies, we all know what different sectors care about, whether it's for-profit, non-profit. Companies care about three things in particular. One is they care about what their consumers think. So we need to make sure we are ginning up, we are talking to consumers in a way that's not about greenhouse gas, 1.5. I don't know what 1.5 means. Somebody will explain it to me someday. I sort of know. But we need to be building a movement of people who understand, and they do understand. They live the reality of it being too hot, and storms and fires and damage. But that's got to come to bear. Employees need to keep saying, we want to work for a company that is values-driven, working on climate. We don't want to work for a company that's running away from that. Now, maybe in a tighter job market, companies are less concerned, but nobody wants to lose 20, 30% of their potential employees. There's also the world that I deal with in part of my time when I'm not dealing with companies, and it's investors. Companies care about their owners, the people who invest in them, the large pension funds, the large institutional investors. And if those investors continue to say, we want you to act, then they start acting. So we've got to build the surround sound. It's not just they're going to come out tomorrow and change everything. The Jimmy Kimmel example I wanted to give for anyone in the United States, one of the late night hosts who's been highly critical of the administration was summarily pulled off the air. I think it's now 2 weeks.
We've heard of him in Canada.
Yeah, see, they've even heard. For reasons of, regardless, I don't want to go into the words he said, I'm not. And what happened was, there has been an outcry against the owners.
People canceling their Disney and Hulu subscriptions.
People canceling their subscriptions. It is a perfect example of acting makes change. Somehow everybody's feeling, I don't know what to do, I can't have an impact, I'm just one small person. I don't know how many people pulled their subscriptions, but somehow, miraculously, we have somebody right here in the front row who did, miraculously, as of an hour ago or so on, we're reading that he's back on. So let's act. Let's all of us act in ways that we can.
And so on that note, Catherine, as we were talking backstage, I feel like you have this message of courage of like, I'm just going to keep saying the thing. I don't care about the opponents. What message would you?
Well, I mean, do I care about the opponents? Like, I want to win. I just like winning. I have a book called Run Like a Girl. Everything I learned about working on climate, I learned from competitive swimming. Long-term goal, you get up every day and do the work, and you act like a regular person and do the stuff that's required. So, I mean, look, I had to land carbon pricing in Canada. That was like really hard. So it's interesting because like we looked at how you talk about it. So we started like carbon tax, polls terribly. Then if you go to carbon pricing, polls like a bit better. If you poll and you say price on pollution, better. If you say it can't be free to pollute, everyone supports it, right? Like, and you can go to a grade 4 class and say it should be free to pollute, and they'd be like, no, and everyone did it. The chapter in the book is called Hard Things Are Hard. We lost it. And when I was a minister, and I was tasked with doing this, and I enlisted Arnold Schwarzenegger. You can read the whole story. It was George Shultz's idea to give all the money back. And so I was like, okay, how are we going to do it? And Canadians, like, I don't know that they totally got it, right? Like, it's kind of a wonky concept. Like, it's, You know, you're going to pay a price at the pump, but we're going to get more money back. So it was actually an affordability thing. So we put it in an affordability frame. But I fought. And what was interesting is I actually think my fighting was as important as anything else, because they're like, damn right, like she's talking about climate and she's fighting, even if we don't exactly know, and that was only one of our policies. So we won it through a very tough election. Like I was like, oh my God, we're gonna lose this election. It's all gonna be my fault. But I was out there fighting every day. We won it through a second election. More Canadians voted for a party that supported carbon pricing. But then, in the hard things are hard, you will realize, like I'm like, okay, everyone's gotta learn some lessons in life. The government stopped talking about it because they were scared. They felt like it was kind of hard. And then, and I hate to say this, but I was in Justin Trudeau's government, he put a pause on the price of pollution on heating oil and put in a sign, a podium sign. Like I was out of politics, I almost like died. I almost choked on my tongue because it had affordability as the message on canceling a price on pollution where all the money went back so that poor people and middle class people were better off. We're suddenly stamping on our own message. And why did that happen? Because there was some pressure. So instead of actually doubling down and giving everyone a flipping heat pump or something, we go and kill a policy that actually worked. And my lesson from that, like, is there's many lessons in life, like communicate well, talk like real people talk about real things that real people care about, but also courage. Like, people do polling, and it's very weird. They're like, we polled and we asked people, you know, is it jobs or is it climate? And I was like, that's a fake question. I'm calling it out right now. No one, and actually there are way more jobs in the clean economy. By the way, I'm from a petrostate, kind of, to be honest. And oil and gas is actually, they'll take away most jobs. They don't care, they're like a company. They want to automate everything. They've reduced a ton of jobs. But they're winning this conversation, and they're also spreading a ton of disinformation. We don't have time in that. We're gonna have to fight that too. But leadership, I just realized, like, leadership is so important because people have to see you care. And if you're a leader who's scared of talking about climate, then they're like, well, maybe if that person who was a climate person or said they were doesn't talk about it, then maybe it's not that important, which is literally the most bonkers thing because it's costing us all way more. It's not gonna get better, it's only gonna get worse. To the point on business, like, business has to accept risk. I'm a lawyer. I'm gonna go now, my new theory of change amongst many is I'm gonna sue everyone. We're gonna go sue everyone because they're breaching their fiduciary obligation. Is it 100% clear? So I do think, and I look at this room and it makes me sad because there's a lot less people in this room. And a lot of people sucked up and they came to climate when climate was cool. And now it is way worse and we have way more solutions. And where is the leadership? And I know it's scary, but I don't know what we're gonna do because it's way scary for me when I think about my 3 kids. That is what's scary.
And that was something that John talked about, was that the materiality of this, that like, yes, hopefully your kids will be alive in the late 2000s, close to 2100, but when we talk about climate in that terms of 2100, 2050 even, it feels so far away, but it's happening now and it's happening everywhere, right? So what are some strategies that you might suggest to people who are in this room, who are watching on YouTube and say, okay, I want to get out of this paralysis and fear, no more climate hushing, I'm going to talk about this. How should they approach that?
Well, I think they need to talk about it in language that the audience understands. It's very basic. I think I'm always so inspired with Catherine because of the passion she carries and that people see, right? And they see that she's defending the things that people care of. I think people want, in general, everybody is part of DNA, protect the places that you love, as John brilliantly has put forward. And I think this is across the political spectrum. So I think we need to talk in languages that they care. For me, there is a lesson, like 2 weeks ago, I posted this thing about IKEA selling solar panels that you can put on your balcony. I've never had the success that I had with that post, 100,000 views, I don't know how many likes, because people want to see things that they can do. Mm-hmm. People are very worried. People in my country, people in the world, people buy products that are cleaner. People demand companies to sell, to behave, because they are worried. And I don't think we're doing this community, we're very smart. We speak with a lot about megawatts, but we don't speak in the language that people understand. And we need to move back to talk about the things that people care of and start there. Start where they care of and then bring it back. Not start with the solutions and then try to win them over about this incredible engineer plant, whatever.
And one note for the people in the U.S., the state of Utah has approved legislation to allow balcony solar. If you're not familiar with what that is, please look it up. It's fascinating. I think it's this message of heart that we're all kind of getting to. So in the few minutes left, if you would, Mindy, give us a suggestion of what do you think is one of those messages that's going to drive people to a point of caring so that the outcome is inevitable? Because once you care so much, there's no debate, right? There's no decision anymore.
Right. So as much as I believe in the heart, I think you got to know your audience. So if we are talking to people who aren't thinking about this a lot, let's talk to them about price of energy and why solar is by far cheaper and why we're creating jobs and why economically it makes sense. If we're talking to the gardening group of America, we want to talk about the outdoors. There are arguments that work. We don't have to have one argument. We need one overarching narrative, but our arguments are going to be a little bit different, group by group by group. I think importantly, as important as what am I going to say in this environment versus not is getting far more facile with the distribution systems. People don't, we think everybody's talking about climate change, right? Because we circulate the people we know at home, at work, and so on. It's climate. The world is not talking about climate. And certainly people in the United States, there are too many other pressing issues. So one is we need to make it relevant to people, the first part of what I said. But two is we need to get out of our bubbles. We need to have distribution systems as good as those who are making the opposite argument. We need to be able to move these arguments out in social media and regular media. And I would argue we haven't done that. So let's get our message right. Let's know our audiences. I am less concerned about overarching message, to be clear, our audience, although I think people have said what might be the right message. I am highly concerned about getting it out there in massive ways to not hundreds of millions, but billions of people.
Excellent. Catherine?
So I've got an idea. Use women. Women are 2.5 times more likely to speak about climate change, are 2.5 more times more likely to act on climate change. And if you have a woman in your C-suite, you're more likely to disclose your emissions. This is why we've created Women Leading on Climate, and I saw this. I saw this in the Paris Agreement. It wasn't because I was looking for it, it was just in my face. Like, it was all these women that were pushing way harder, and they were using whatever message they needed to be. Like, if you were labor, then you would talk about jobs. If you were Mary Robinson, you'd talk about justice. If you were, religious, you would talk about, how there's like this moral obligation. I don't actually care why people want to act on climate, but I think that who's the distribution vehicle? It's women, half the population, and they're the ones that talk about it. And most women will also have empathy. So this idea about acting for people you love, that is an easy message. And if you're linking it to what people are seeing, people they love are getting hurt. People they love are losing their insurance. They're losing their houses. They're losing their lives. They're losing everything. And I think it's just, but it has to be more organic, I think. And so I actually think if we focus, so sadly we got a lot of guys here, so that's good. You guys can be out too, that's fine. It's not gonna be as effective, but it's just true. 2.5 times more likely to talk about it, and they're gonna be talking to people who care, because it's gonna be, often husbands, sons, kids, other women. I think that vehicle, because I'm always thinking like, okay, sue, obviously people do their NDCs, like even the language we use is so terrible, but it is also getting women out there, because the thing about this, which is the thing that makes me so angry, is it's so stupid that this is getting worse. It's getting so much worse. So we're gonna see more wildfires, so more kids won't be able to go play soccer. We're gonna have to evacuate communities in Canada. That we're gonna have flooding that's actually literally taking houses and buildings and cars down streets. And then we're like, let's not talk about this. Like, we don't really wanna talk about that. That sucks. Well, that doesn't make any sense, and we owe it, and all of you in this room owe it too, to just be out there talking about this. But as you said, the solutions, like, the problem is we have to fight, and this is what people don't always like. Like, I know we don't want to talk about fossil fuel companies sometimes. I'm sorry, I live in Canada. If I don't talk about, like, to fight the messages they've got, we're not gonna be able to win. You gotta do both, right? Because they're pretty effective about natural gas. I'm like, there's literally nothing natural about your gas, folks. But they're out there advertising and disinformation. But if we can get women in particular out there talking about it, talking about their kids, talking about they're worried about this, but have you seen, if you get a solar panel, you could, or if you, I think also vote for people that actually care about climate. That's probably the most important thing you can do, because actually where you really get action, and they'll hold companies accountable too. Like, I do think there is really a huge opportunity of change, because it's getting so bad now, and the costs are so high to people's lives, to infrastructure, risks to companies. And on the flip side, we have all these amazing solutions that are far cheaper and better and enable people. And so, but we're gonna have to be out there, because it's like getting real right now, and people are gonna have to be brave. And I don't know what to say in the United States. Like, it is really hard for you folks, but I know solidarity is so important. We saw that with Women Leading on Climate. We talk about sometimes we're the only woman in the boardroom, in the cabinet room, in the negotiating room, and like people, we speak up and they say, oh, is that woman gonna talk about climate change again? And we're like, yeah, damn right we are, because we know some other woman in some other boardroom or some other negotiating room is out there talking about it. So solidarity, like we are with you, and just be out there and be brave, and then we will win. We will win.
And we saw that in the Science Moms ad that Potential Energy created. We have only a few moments left, but I want to give Maria and Mindy a chance to give us a message that you have seen that has resonated, that has worked, that maybe people can borrow and use as inspiration.
Well, I think when there is fear, what do? Start to think about solutions, right? When you have a problem. And I think that's what we are seeing in the Women Leading on Climate. There's no single day where I don't see women that want to set up a chapter of the Women Leading on Climate in their countries and bring more women and start to work on the solutions. So remember, if you are afraid, the best thing you can do is to start to work on the solutions to get out of where you are now.
Excellent. Mindy, give the last word.
Make this in the interest of the people you're talking to. So as a mother, and anyone who knows me, I've almost in 40 years not given a speech where I haven't talked about Abe and Jesse. They used to be this big and this big. Now they're 30 and 35, but I still talk about them. If there were a bus coming at your kids, climate change is that bus. What would we do? We would jump in front of that bus as a mother to get our kids out of the way of that bus. We've got that bus coming at us. We've got to put this in the words of what people know. For the economics of it, though, the business community, the financial community, and we need them involved. They have the power, they have clout, they have resources. They are part of the problem or part of the solution in creating emissions. We need to talk about the fact that the cheapest energy now is solar, or solar and wind. We need to talk about that. It's jobs. We need to talk about that it will cost them millions and millions of dollars if they don't have enough water for their manufacturing facilities in place X, or if they can't run their farm at full farming and they can only run it at 50%, which was the case in California 1 year because of a drought, the second year because of too much water. Nobody wants to be in that position. Any company that finds themselves unable to build a new manufacturing facility or run it, or they can't run their farm, and there are thousands of examples, are not companies that are going to thrive. So this is in everybody's interest. We don't have to manufacture the reasons, the excuses. We just need to talk about them.
The materiality of it all. Maria, Mindy, Catherine, thank you so much, ladies. Wonderful conversation. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Go Canada, go Boston, go Madrid. That was awesome. I have a couple of closing remarks. Things I took away from the panel. We think about this a lot. We analyze this a lot. We sweat over the data a lot. But I think the idea of acting and not thinking is probably a good one. I want to share a little bit of inspiration from a study we're going to release in a couple of days on climate and affordability. And you can call it the affordability challenge, and you can say, clean energy is a problem for affordability, or you can flip it around and say it's actually the solution. So what does the data say? A leader might say, oh my gosh, I've got a liability. I've just moved climate policy forward, and energy prices are up, and the grid is expensive, we've got to add a whole bunch of capacity. What do I do? What does the data say? The data says it's about a third, a third, a third. A third, a little bit more, the leading that says clean energy is cheaper. About a third say, I don't know, right? This is a low information environment. About a third say fossil energy is cheaper. expose the group to one message, and I raise the number of people who say that clean energy is cheaper by 29 percentage points, okay? And so we gotta act, we gotta play for the win. And we sit around saying, oh, we shouldn't talk about affordability because it's a liability for climate policy. We did an open-ended question that says, what is causing your energy prices to go up? You know what percentage of people in an open-ended question said it's climate policy or clean energy? 2%. 2%. So we sit around and think and worry and analyze and get small and get intellectual and get cerebral because this movement attracts some really big brains when 2% of the humans out there are blaming us for this thing. And we can double the amount of support for the association of clean and cheap together by just talking about it. And so I love what I took away from the panel, which is it's time to act, it's time to do things, it's time to push hard, it's time to be courageous, it's time to lead, it's time to fail, and it's time to succeed, because we really can win this, and the data is very clear on that. So thank you all for joining, and go forth and evangelize, because change happens slowly until it happens fast, and I think we could be on one of those moments. Appreciate it.